for the El Paso Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and today we'll be discussing a presentation called "Accessibility and ADA During COVID-19," featuring Mr. Julio Perez. He's the ADA coordinator for the City of El Paso. First off, we just want to highlight that the Hispanic Chamber is celebrating their 30-year anniversary this year, so that's a pretty good milestone. Our vision here at the Chamber is to become the core component for the El Paso region and fostering entrepreneurial economic development where our existing companies are growing, where our entrepreneurs are reaching new horizons, and where our small minority and women-owned businesses are thriving and outpacing all other markets. Some of the benefits of joining the Chamber are networking. We have several events. One of our most popular is the Cafe Pan Dulce that one of our business specialists does. Business development, we provide counseling and services for businesses. Our business development specialists are amazing. Financing, we can put you in touch with banks. The government is giving grants right now and loans, so we can connect you with that. Procurement, we can get you in contact with the city, with the county for contracts. And then advocacy is what I do. Just provide advocate on behalf of businesses to politicians, public officials. And we have our entrepreneurial technical assistance centers. We have 3 of them: the Women's Business Border Center, the MBDA Business Center, and the MWEDC. All great resources for startups and growing your business. And we'll give a little introduction on Mr. Perez. As I said before, he's the ADA coordinator for the city of El Paso. He served the city of El Paso for almost 12 years. He is the city's ADA coordinator and conducts oversight of the ADA paratransit services with Sun Metro. He's a registered accessibility specialist in the state of Texas. He is also prior to his employment with the city, he became familiar with ADA compliance as a custom home general contractor and business owner. His hobbies include computer programming, which is really interesting, and spending time with his 2 twin daughters. So, Mr. Perez, I'll hand it over to you. Let me stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. Yes, as a matter of fact, just interesting. My background is in computer science, so my studies, my degree is in computer science, and there's sometimes life takes you into different directions, but I still enjoy my computer programming, whatever I can get, right? So thank you for that. First of all, let me just thank you for the opportunity to be here. I always enjoy a chance to be able to speak to the public and to anyone who's interested in learning more about ADA compliance and making our services more accessible throughout our city. I really believe that as we work together to have a more accessible city, we're building a city for ourselves, really, for our generations, our kids, our families. A more accessible city is one that is going to be more enjoyable for all of us, and you'll see as I get more into my presentation. So what I'd like to do is present to you really an overview of what it means to comply with ADA in the business sector and in the community. I am the city's ADA coordinator, and then just kind of quickly define what that is. I represent the city, right? The city departments. I really don't have any jurisdiction or any purview into the private sector. And in fact, I can provide information about ADA, but I can't really provide any guidance, certainly not any legal advice, because I'm not an attorney. Whatever information I can give you is through my own experience and through the certification through the state. But I just wanted to put out that information out there, because there may be some folks out there who are looking at becoming more compliant. They may want to write up their own policies and procedures. And I really recommend that you get someone who represents you, your company, your business, so that you are well within the law. Okay, so with that, I'm just going to share my screen here and open up my presentation. Can you see it?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, excellent. So here we are. It's really about ADA, and especially during this time of COVID-19, it's very interesting because everybody's coming up with their own policies and procedures in terms of trying to comply with ADA. So hopefully this will provide some information to you and you can do better. But I'd like to start out with, first of all, talking about what is ADA, right? How does it apply to me? How does it apply to everyone out there? And under ADA, someone is considered to have a disability if he or she has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, right? So what's major life activity? Everything that you do on a daily basis, you walk, you breathe, you see, you shower, you dress yourself, you walk. I mean, everything that you have to do on a daily basis, if any of those are substantially impaired, then you are deemed to have a disability. Okay. But it goes beyond that. Also, if you have a record of having an impairment, so let's say you had cancer at one time and you beat it, that by itself doesn't just doesn't go away in terms of protection for you. So you continue to be protected under ADA for discrimination purposes. Also, if you are regarded having a disability, so this is an interesting one. So if you ever meet someone and because of the way they talk, the way they walk, the way they behave themselves, if you think they have a disability, but they don't have one, right? But you think they do, and you act upon that information and you mistreat them and you treat them differently than anybody else, you are, in essence, breaking the law because you're acting on the perception or the knowledge that you think they have a disability. So they're also protected under that. Also, if you have an association with someone with a disability, let's say you're a caretaker, you're the parent, the brother of someone with a disability, and you're acting under that capacity of helping others, and you have that relationship, you are also protected under ADA. So just because you are the caretaker of someone with a disability, they can't just discriminate against you. They may say, well, you're not the one with a disability. Well, you're also protected because you have that association. So under that definition, if you really want to think about it, there are a lot of people, right? A lot of people in our city that are covered under ADA. So it really behooves us to understand what we have at hand and how we can protect ourselves in making sure that we don't break the law. So another item that comes to to me all the time is like service animals. How do I need to allow them into my business? What if they don't have a certification? What if they don't have a harness? What do I do? So just so you know, starting in 2011, only dogs were recognized as service animals, with the exception of miniature horses and in some areas. We don't really have, I've never really seen that here, but there are some areas where that's seen. Service animals are really allowed to be in all public facilities where the owner is also authorized. That's just about anywhere. I mean, I can think of a couple of places where, like, if you're going to the hospital and you're about to go into the operating room, that's about the time that you might want to think about parting ways for a time, right? The zoo, for example, we're in the process of writing up some policies where maybe a service animal is not allowed to go in some parts of the zoo just because it'll agitate the animals, lions or whatever. So, but all of those things need to be documented and in procedures and policies. You can't just not allow a service animal to be part of your business. You may only ask two questions. One, is this dog's a service animal required because of your disability? And if the answer is yes, then that's it. You don't question that. But you can ask, what function or task has the dog been trained to do for you? And if they answer anything that kind of makes sense, they do this for me, they alert me, they help me, any of those action verbs would do. But if they say, well, no, not really, they give me comfort, if you will. Now, comfort animals are not covered under ADA. So if you have an animal just for the pure purpose of just the enjoyment of it or just the companionship, that's not covered under ADA. It's a gray line a little bit because someone could argue legally and they could win the fact that, it's a comfort animal because, and it's covered under ADA because the comfort they provide prevents me from having epileptic seizures, right? Okay, that could be an action, right? That could be something that they're trained to do for you. So the law is very broad, very vague in some cases because it's trying to protect everybody who's going to be covered. So what I do for our folks is I tell them, look, as long as they tell you that the animal does anything that makes sense for them, don't question it. You know, if they tell you it's a service animal, go ahead and do it. It is what it is. There could be some people that abuse the system. It will always be that case. Just like there are people who will abuse the ADA parking placards, or the tags out there. So those are the two questions you can ask. Other than that, there's no special certification, tags, harness that is required. No size of dogs. It doesn't even have to be on a leash, right? As long as the animal's under control of the person, that's what is required. It has to be under the owner's control. Well, control could be by voice, right? So it doesn't even have to be on a leash as long as the animal's behaving. Now, if the animal is not behaving, they're being a threat to others, they're just walking around, sniffing around, you could ask at that time to have the animal removed. But be very careful. I've had instances where people are ask the owner to leave. Well, no, the owner is not the one misbehaving, is the animal. So just make sure that, is the animal that's asked to be removed, unless the owner is also misbehaving. I mean, that could be your policy, but be careful as to what you do under that case. Why do we have all of these things, right? The definition, ADA law, service animals, all these things we got to do. Well, because at the end of the day, it provides access to people. It really is what it accounts for. If we had our environment completely accessible, our people would enjoy freedom a lot more. A friend of mine, I always tell the story, a friend of mine told me one day, I'm not free. I don't feel free in our country. And I said, what do you mean? Well, she says, well, because when I'm in a wheelchair, I don't have the freedom to just pick up a restaurant and just go. I have a list of accessible restaurants that I go to, and those are the ones that I attend. But if there's one restaurant that you go to that is not accessible, I'll probably never be able to go there because it's not accessible to me. The bathroom may not be accessible, the door, etc. So it's about freedom. It's about freedom of accessing, all the things that you and I enjoy on a daily basis. Those without a disability. In terms of the services, the shopping, groceries, enjoying the outdoors, the restaurants, etc. Think about that. The more severe your disability, the more hampered you're going to be in enjoying what's out there. So when you are thinking about making your services accessible, think about the fact that you are providing freedom to your patrons, that you're providing a quality of life, enjoyment of life. It's about living. You allow them to live a normal life versus being stuck at home, being stuck somewhere where they can't go. It's the difference between being shackled or constrained, not being able to do all the things that you want to do versus just enjoying life as we all do. But at the end of the day, do you care? And I don't mean this in a derogatory way. I know we all care, but what I mean by that is that let's face it, when you're building your business, when you're building that environment, you're writing your policies, you're writing your procedures, you're not thinking first and foremost ADA compliance. I don't think very many people do, unless they come from a background where they have someone with a disability or they themselves have a disability. But in general, you don't start out thinking, oh, I'm going to build a business and it's going to be ADA compliant. We kind of do things a lot of times just because we have to, because we're reminded, or because we have a lawsuit in our hands, or all of those things, right? But not because we really do want to. So I'm hoping that with this presentation, you'll get that sense of just ownership of really an obligation to society to do more than what is required, to be proactive in doing what you need to do. And like, for example, I see this all the time, hey, I gotta have a bathroom. As long as I have a toilet and a urinal in there, That's all I need. Well, no, think about someone with a mobility device. How are they going to get into your bathroom? How are they going to access your services? Think about the sidewalks that we use. Nowadays, sidewalks are used for everything other than walking. I mean, it seems like if there's a sidewalk there in front of us, we think, oh, goody, it's like I can use it for anything nowadays. And then if you have think about if you are in a mobility device and they want to access your services where everything's blocked now. And I have the same problem with the city, with posts and poles, electrical posts being placed there, hydrants, fire hydrants, all kinds of things there. I'm constantly fighting with people to make sure that they don't restrict our sidewalks. So it's about removing physical barriers. Physical barriers at the entrance as you're approaching your business, out in the parking lot, in your entrance, the sidewalks in front of your business, the door that's wide enough. An ADA button door, automatic door is not required by ADA, but if you can do it, great, right? If you have a lot of patrons that have disabilities that come into your business and you can afford to do that, that's even better. So making sure that everything around you is accessible to everyone. So parking, for example, we must have ADA parking available. At least one of them has to be a van accessible parking space. Now the other ones, if you only have one parking space, the other ones can be just a regular vehicle, but there is a number of spaces that have to be van accessible. You can, I'm not going to go into all the details, but you can find all the details in terms of dimensions and signage and all that on the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation website. There's what is called the Texas Accessibility Standards, and there you can find a really thick book that tells you all the dimensions, everything you must have. If you have X number of parking spaces, at least some of them have to be van accessible. The width of them have to be there. If there's there has to be a path of travel from the point of exiting the vehicle to the sidewalk, and of course to your main entrance. But let's talk about services as well. A lot of times we think about just physical barriers, parking, the door width, the sidewalks, the maneuverability inside your business, but we're also talking about services. And not a lot of people put a lot of thought into this. We're talking about any information, your menus, your pamphlets, your flyers that you give out to the public. Are they so small that only a perfect vision person, 20-year-old person can read it? Or are they accessible, large print? Are they available in electronic format? So if someone comes into your store and they're visually impaired, can they have access to a menu that they can read on their computer? All the material inside the business, is it accessible, or at least is it available to someone who will request it in alternate format? How about your equipment, your kiosks, your computers, your mobile apps that you have? Are they accessible to someone who is blind? All mobile apps should be ADA accessible. And what I mean by ADA accessible, mainly I mean that someone who's accessing your mobile app on their phone their phone can read the information back to the user. The menus, the navigational features within the phone, it can all be read back to the person using it. That's what I mean by ADA compliant. Do we make sure that we buy something, any type of computer software or mobile app or website that is used by our community? Do we make sure that it's ADA compatible? Do we make sure that it's part of the contract that we enter into, that they do so? All those things are extremely important. What about inclusion? What about treating someone, customer service, if you will? Do we provide training? Do our folks, our people who come in contact with someone with a disability, do they understand how to interact with someone with a disability? Do they understand that if they encounter someone who is blind, you lend your arm to them and you lead them and guide them. to whatever they're going to? What if they're deaf and they can't communicate? Do we have a process in place so that the employee knows what to do, in terms of being able to communicate with them? Are we teaching our employees what it means to provide reasonable accommodation or modification nowadays? The term is changing a little bit. It used to be called reasonable accommodation. Now it's more reasonable modification, because at the end of the day, we're modifying the process that we go through, right? This is a very, very important topic. Let me see if I have I have a separate slide on that, just because I want you to understand what it means to comply with the law. Are they knowledgeable? Are you yourself knowledgeable as business owners on ADA, right? Do you read up on it? Do you take the time to understand what you need to do, and not wait until you have a lawsuit in your hands or until someone complains? I think that's extremely important. Not a lot of people understand ADA, and it's not until you encounter someone and you have someone in your family who has a disability, that's when you start looking into it. But let me talk a little bit about public accommodation or modification. This is really important because it doesn't matter what you have in place. You have to make sure that your services are available to everyone. One good way of putting, I always tell people, when they ask me, how do I know that I'm being compliant, that I'm providing all the things that I need to our patrons, our customers? And I tell them it's very simple. If you have someone with a disability and someone without, and the one with the disability walks away not receiving the same services or equivalent services as the person without the disability, then you're breaking the law, right? And why I say that is because it's extremely important to know what it means by the grandfather clause, right? A lot of times people will quote that, well, I don't have my restaurant ADA accessible because I'm grandfathered into it. It's an old building. I don't have to do anything about it. Well, in essence, you may be right, okay? Because the law is not normally retroactive. If someone passes the law, they're not going to go back and require you to fix something that was there prior to the law. And that's what happened with ADA. When the ADA was signed back in 1990, and it went into effect more like in 1992, businesses and entities were not required to go back in time and fix their issues. From that point forward, they had to comply. But there is no grandfather clause in ADA anywhere. You can't really quote grandfather clause. There's a term called safe harbor. And safe harbor is basically similar in the sense that it says that if the law was passed today, you don't have to go back, and you're not in compliance, you don't have to go back and make yourself compliant. Okay, but we still have the responsibility, and this is the key here. We still have to have the responsibility to provide equal access. So if you have a business and it has a stairway in the entrance, and you don't have a ramp, and someone in the mobility device comes to your place, you still have to provide equal access, or at least as much as you can, equivalent access. So that means that maybe if you have to come out and bring the menu out to them and bring the food out to them, whatever you need to do to make sure your services are accessible to them, you got to do it. And you have to do it without providing any excuses, right? I hear it all the time. Well, and I'm sure you've had that same experience when you call someone and you say, well, my computer won't let me. Or our policy is such as that, it doesn't allow me to help you. Well, ADA doesn't care about your own policies and procedures. It cares about you providing equivalent access to them. So what that means is that you as the owner and your employees and everybody who manages your business has to know that when it comes to providing equivalent or equal access to our patrons or our citizens, they have to do whatever they can, even if it comes to the point of not following your own personal procedures and policies. If you have to modify them on the fly, if you have to, do whatever you need to do so that the person leaves receiving that service. That's what that means. It means that you reasonably modify all the policies and procedures to be able to make sure that they receive the service that they're requesting. And so, the question that comes up often now is like, oh, wait a minute. So what do I do now with this, ADA and the COVID-19 and safety? Well, they have to work hand in hand. At the end of the day, safety, if you were to put them on a scale, well, safety is more important, right? You have to keep everyone safe, but you have to do it while complying with ADA. So when the order came out, the directive came out to say, well, you have to wear masks in public everywhere you go. Well, remember, they also provided some exceptions that if you have a medical condition or you really can't wear a mask, well, you're not required to do so. So if they come into your place and they're saying, well, I can't wear a mask because I have a medical condition, well, we have to follow that law as well. And so it's a gray area. It's a difficult item to maneuver through, but we have to work in tandem with both items, providing a safe environment for our patrons while we also comply with ADA. Now, when it comes to writing your own policies and procedures, when it comes to that, I do recommend that you get some legal advice. Make sure that whatever you're doing, you're not discriminating against someone with a disability, right? So, for example, I got a call one day, and of course, we can't really provide legal advice to the private sector, but I tell them what my own interpretation is. Someone will say, well, they can't make me park away from the store. They have to allow me to park right next to the main entrance and be able to go straight into the business. But when I have to come out of the business, they're making me come out through the other entrance, and then it's very far for me to come back to my parking place. And I tell them, well, I think that's reasonable, right? The reasonableness is one where you have to look at and really maybe get some legal advice on that, because it's subject to interpretation. But in my own interpretation, I told this person, I said, well, walking a few more steps or traveling a couple of more, steps to be able to get to your car in order to be safe, I think that's reasonable. So someone can't just pull the ADA card all the time and say, well, you have to do this because I have a disability. And I hear that all the time. Just because I have a disability, you've got to do this. No, not necessarily. If the law says that if you do something for one group of people, then you also have to do it for everyone. You cannot discriminate. And I tell them all the time, I say, you know what? Civil rights came about as a result of people being treated differently. So now you're telling me that because you have a disability, now you're asking to be treated differently than anybody else? Well, it goes against what ADA says. So again, if you put some policy in place, some procedure in place, and as long as you're treating everyone equally, and treating everyone the same and for the purpose of being safe, I think you're going to be all right. But the minute you start making exceptions for those folks that have disabilities or not disabilities, that's when you may start getting into trouble, and that's when you have to really sit down and talk to someone who can provide some legal advice. So I know that I covered just the very bare bones on what ADA is, and I didn't want to assume that any of you that I could cover all the topics that any of you are interested in. So I wanted to give some time for some questions. So with that, I'm going to open it up for some questions. If any of you want to raise your hand, Daniel, I don't know what process we have for this. Just FYI as well, if you ever have any questions in terms of physical barriers, there's always the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. They're the ones that really enforce the physical barrier portion at the state level. The city itself does not have any jurisdiction over the private sector. It's a federal law, but there's a lot of places where you can get information. There's also a place called easterseals.com. They are a nonprofit, and they help a lot in terms of being able to answer questions, being able to help. And so with that, Daniel, I'll bring it back to you and see how we can handle some question and answer items.
Okay, yeah, so thanks for that presentation. It was very informative, and I'm sure that all that information is valuable to our business and our members and the broader business community. So yeah, we will open it up for questions. We have some participants in this webinar, so if you guys want to ask Mr. Pettis any questions about the ADA, just drop them down here in the Q&A box. It looks like we already have a few, so
Okay.
let me go ahead and ask them. So you talked about a miniature horse. You touched on that earlier. Why is a miniature horse exempted? Am I required to allow a service miniature horse inside my business?
Well, I haven't seen it here in El Paso, but the answer is yes. So if someone comes in with a small miniature horse and they say that it's their service animal, you would have to allow it in because it's part of the law. It's part of what is required. Now, we don't see it a lot in these parts of the country. There are other parts of the U.S. where that's seen a lot more. But I suspect that in time, even that's going to go away. I think they're trying to move to just dogs being service animals. There was a time when other animals were used as service animals, and it just became very chaotic. It was just all over the place. But I think the government is going towards just service or dogs being service animals.
Mr. Pettis, I can't see you. Did you want to start your video again?
Yeah. Hold on a second.
Okay, sorry.
There you go.
Okay, there we go. That's good. Okay, so another question. I'm assuming these are going to be mostly business related because we're a chamber of commerce.
Of course.
So what is the most common mistake or violation businesses make regarding the ADA?
So the most common mistake, first of all, is not allowing service animals to come into their business, putting all kinds of excuses, or not understanding that a service animal does not have to be on a leash. One time I got this question or this comment that, I'm sure it was not a service animal because it was a small puppy, a small dog. Well, the law doesn't go into the size of dog, the breed, any of that. Is just a dog, service animal, a dog that provides a function for someone with a disability. And it can be in their arms. It can be, as long as they're in control of the person next to them behaving, that's all that is required. The other item is that I run into a lot is here, especially in our city, in the city of El Paso, we have a lot of older neighborhoods where a lot of the older buildings do not have bathrooms that are accessible, or the front entrance is not accessible. That's a very common item for a lot of our businesses, and they're under the safe harbor time frame because maybe the building was prior to ADA. I want to tell you something that if you really want to be proactive, you can file for a construction permit and make your area more accessible without triggering other remodeling code within the building. So a lot of times people are saying, well, you know what, if I make my bathroom accessible, they're going to come back and require for me to update all my electrical code and plumbing and everything around the building, and I'm going to trigger all kinds of things. No, I will help you if you run into that issue. If you want to be proactive and just make your services more accessible in terms of your bathroom, of your entrance, I can help you to make sure that you're doing that without triggering all kinds of other construction requirements.
Okay. So you touched on the two questions that can be asked for service animals, and one of them was, the disability. Do you have to provide proof of your disability to the?
No, sir. There's no documentation, and think about this, right? It really does take a lot to train a service animal. I asked this question a while back. What do you think costs to train a service animal? It's anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 to train a service animal, depending on the disability. And so not anybody can afford that, right? Not everybody has the insurance to be able to get a properly trained service animal. So you can train your own service animal. If you have a disability, you can your own little puppy and raise that puppy to the point where they're providing a service to you. And you're not going to be able to certify them in any way, providing proof of training. So no certification, no paperwork, no documentation is required.
Going back to, a business question, how quickly must an employer respond to a request for accommodation or a customer accommodation? So, an employee accommodation, if they're asking for it, how long does an employer have to, respond to that? And a customer accommodation, for example, if a restaurant has a customer and they request a menu with Braille, how long do they have to respond, or how much?
That's a very good question. This is one area where there's really nothing in the law that says you must comply or report back to the employee or the customer by a certain time. But here's a very general rule that if you ever follow it, you're going to be pretty safe, right? Because people will come and ask me, what is reasonable modification or reasonable accommodation mean? How do I know that I've reached that point where I've reasonably accommodated to that person? And I was telling them this. Bottom line is reasonable modification, reasonable accommodation is a conversation between two different people that are coming together to an understanding. And as long as they have an understanding together, you have reached that point. So you come to me and you say, Julio, I want to access your business, your services, but I can't because I don't have access to your menu or your bathroom or this. And then you come and says, okay, well, how can we make it happen? How can I provide a service to you? And they say, well, I need you to provide me with Braille, a Braille document. And then you say, well, I don't have a printer. I don't have a Braille printer at this point. Is there another way I can accommodate to you? And then the person will say, well, how about this or that? And so as long as you come to an understanding, that's what's required, right? Because the person is not going to go back and say, well, they violated my rights and they did it after I accepted an agreement that they would help me this way. So just that's what it means. Coming together of two different people, coming to an understanding of what services or items are going to be modified to provide you with what you need to get that service. If that made any sense, I went around it a lot.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I like that's pretty interesting, that agreement, how they can work together like that. That's pretty interesting. So the next question touches a little bit on confidentiality. It looks like, may an employer tell other employees that someone is receiving an ADA accommodation?
So basically, in general terms, you should always maintain someone's disability in strict confidence, right? That's your responsibility in terms of also you working with a customer or a patron. It is against the law to ask about disability. Okay, so you can never, as an employer or a business owner or someone, straight up ask someone, do you have a disability? Or what's your disability? That's against the law. And the reason it's against the law is very simple, because two different people can have the same disability and yet have completely different needs. The disability doesn't tell you anything about the person, it's their need. So I may be in a wheelchair and you may be in a wheelchair as well. Well, I may be very, very independent because I've lived with it for many, many years. I don't need much help. But you just, you encountered that disability just a few months ago, you may need a lot more help. So rather than asking, you have a disability, you ask, what is it that I can help you with, right? What is it that you need that I can help with? That tells you what you need to do to accommodate. The disability itself will not tell you anything. I have some friends who are blind, and I'm telling you, they're so independent, you would think they're sighted, right? Because they don't need any help with anything. They can maneuver through their computer, they can walk with a cane or a service animal, they're everywhere. Whereas someone who is just visually impaired, they haven't lost their complete sight, they may need more help than the person who's completely blind. So disability doesn't tell you anything. You find out about their needs and then address the needs.
I think what that question was also asking is, among coworkers, if like you're working with someone with a disability and, maybe that you're struggling with, a project that, something like that, and they ask their boss or, their boss, like, does this person have a disability? Like, does he need accommodate? They can't answer that by law, right?
No, no, no. I mean, again, go through your HR department if you need to come up with some policies. But in general, anything that has to do with someone's disability is between the employer and the person and those that just need to know. Like if you're a supervisor as well and you need to work with that person, you may have to know that there is something special that you need to do because you're the direct supervisor. So only the people that need to know, and even those people need to understand that they have to keep that information in confidentiality, right? They can't just share it with everybody because they don't know the circumstance. Nobody knows the circumstances behind the help that they're needing, and nobody should care.
Okay. So now, I guess, transitioning into our current situation with COVID-19 and the pandemic persisting, does the ADA protect people with disabilities from wearing a face mask? Can someone claim, ADA and not wear a face mask?
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, if you look at the directive that we have under the city, it allows for those exceptions. So someone like, for example, I'm also part of the, as you mentioned, part of the Sun Metro service. If someone boards our bus and says, I can't wear a mask because I have a disability or I can't breathe. If I were to wear a mask, I have asthma and I would just pass out or whatever the circumstances might be. You have to allow them to board. And we do that because we're also complying with the law. Now, in terms of trying to be safe and also complying with the law, we're doing all kinds of things to make sure that that person who's boarding is somewhat isolated from, we ask them to sit in the front versus being in the back. So we're trying to do things that while we're complying with the law, we're also trying to keep everyone safe. And so, yes, that's a fine line that we have to walk, but we have to do it because it's one of those things that is part of what we have to do.
I think that's valuable information, especially right now during COVID-19. So that'll clear some things up for people. Going back to an employer and within a business, not necessarily with customers, but like with their employees. If someone, requests an ADA accommodation, is restructuring a job position a reasonable accommodation for an ADA, complaint?
Yeah, and this is where you really do have to seek some legal advice because the reasonableness depends on your own circumstances. As you can imagine, for the city of El Paso as an employer, a government entity, the reasonableness test, the standard for that is going to be a lot higher. We're a government agency. We have more funding. We have all kinds of resources available to us versus maybe a mom and pop who has only 2 employees. They are not able to provide the same type of reasonable accommodation that maybe the city would do. So when it comes to being able to restructure or change your way of doing things in order to accommodate to someone with a disability, you really have to make sure that you have someone who's helping you through that process because, you want to do the best that you can for the employee, but at the same time, not have it be an overburden for you. It shouldn't take you out of business to be able to restructure someone's job or environment to be able to help someone. So there's a fine balance with that, and one where you really have to seek some advice.
Okay. So Another question. This one's kind of, I don't really.
Daniel,
Okay,
I
so
think you were breaking up. I didn't hear you.
okay. Can you hear me now? Is it better? Or is it
Uh,
still?
yeah, okay, now go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, it might just be the connection
You might
going
be.
in and out. Hmm. So, someone wants you to expound on the sidewalks and partially remodeled sidewalks, such as slopes and accessibility. Can you talk about that and, what businesses have to do, um, to accommodate to people that are requesting that?
Daniel, very good topic. I think people need to know first and foremost that the responsibility to modify, maintain, build sidewalks falls upon the property owner. The abutting property owner is the one that has the responsibility to make sure that their sidewalks are in good condition, that there ramps, et cetera, around them. Now, again, it goes back. So like if your home, your business was built prior to 1990, you may not have to go back and redo your area, but you still have the responsibility of making sure that the people that are coming to your business have equal access. So you may have to look into possibly modifying, the area around you to make sure that your folks have equal or equitable access. But at the end of the day, the making sure that the sidewalks are in compliant, it falls back on the property owner. Now, the only two times that the city will jump in and help with that is if there's been a project to resurface or reconstruct the street. So when the city of El Paso has a reconstruction or resurfacing project of that street corridor, they will also come in and rebuild or fix or bring the sidewalks into compliance. But aside from that, the responsibility will fall back on the property owner.
I think you answered that pretty well. Someone is asking, so they say terminology has changed over time in relation to people with disabilities. Words that we grew up hearing are now considered inappropriate and offensive. Have you considered maybe touching on this for future trainings?
Yes, and like I said, there's so much information. If you want to, we can do a follow-up webinar later on where I can go into more detail. But certainly, the way we address and we talk, it has a lot to do with us being sensitive to someone's disability. So the words disabled doesn't apply. I mean, how can someone be disabled? Disabled is when you are talking about a vehicle that is no longer works, right? That is completely non-functioning. So when you say disabled, you're really calling the person non-functioning, doesn't work. All those negative connotations. So yeah, stay away from the words disabled, retarded, mentally retarded, those kinds of things. It's all about the disability that we need to stay away from. So for example, when we address someone with a disability, it's not a disability person, a disabled person, a wheelchair person, a blind person. It's always the person first. So if you get into the habit of just saying the person or the person's name and not even mention the disability unless it has a purpose, right? It's always John. John, that's it. If he's blind or not blind or if he's in a wheelchair, it doesn't matter. It's John. But we also a lot of times get into the habit of saying, oh, John, the person in a wheelchair, or blind John, the person who's blind. Well, we don't have to do that. It's always a person. And if you have to mention the disability, it's the disability and not the person. So I say, I'll give you an example. Someone who needs assistance on our buses. I have a passenger here who is in a mobility device and needs help with their mobility device, right? You don't say, I have a wheelchair person, or I have a wheelchair bound person, or I have a diabetic person, right? It's always the person who has diabetes, or the person who is a mobility device user, or the person who is blind. It's the name or the person, the pronoun, personal pronoun first, and then the disability. And the disability only when it needs to be mentioned. If it doesn't need to be mentioned, don't even mention it. So people first language, right?
Yeah. I think that's important, yes, to, emphasize that they're still individuals even though they have a disability.
Yes.
Or, that's good. So I think this is one of our last questions. We've covered pretty much all the ones asked. How would you proceed if a remodel on a basement or a second story existing building without an elevator or ADA straight? Hold on. So how would you, I guess I understand. How would you remodel a basement or like a second story building without an elevator or stairs?
It's difficult right off the bat, right? Especially if it's an older building. But you can also always do a ramp, possibly. If you can't do it because it's just physically impossible, attempt to have some of your services on the first floor or on a level where people have access to it. It's always about looking at the area and think about what services am I providing, and are some of those services in an area where possibly I can move them. If you can't physically fix the building, maybe you can do something with the services and make an accommodation to the services. So I would encourage you to contact maybe the one-stop shop, permitting shop at the city, and see if there's anything that you can do to make your area more accessible. And if you can't, because again, there's some buildings that are just not very conducive to some changes to make them accessible, think about maybe the services that you're providing. Can you change those?
That concludes all our questions from the participants. I'll ask one on behalf of the chamber for all our members, and I think people are watching on Facebook. So if they want to access more information or they need guidance for their business or anything, what is there a website they can visit or a number that they can call? For, the city or anybody else that can help them with ADA accommodations or requirements.
So when it comes to information about ADA compliance, I wish that maybe the city would have a support mechanism for individuals like businesses, the private sector, schools, nonprofits, and things like that. But unfortunately, the city doesn't have any jurisdiction over the private sector. So as such, we can't really provide any assistance. Other than when you pull a permit to build or reconstruct or remodel your building, then the city has some ordinances in place where during the permitting process, we make sure that you're in compliance. But aside from any ordinance that is in place, we don't have the ability to provide any assistance to you directly. So the only way for you to get any assistance is by going to the sites that I mentioned to you, and that is on the screen again. And when it comes to City of El Paso code enforcement, it's 311. Again, just code enforcement, people blocking sidewalks, not keeping their area clean. If you want some information on ADA, there's always the ada.gov website or the accessboard.gov website, or more locally at the state level, the Department of Licensing and Regulation. There's also the number 512-463-6599. You can also look up or Google the Texas Accessibility Standards. You'll find a full document there that allows you to do what you need to do. If you need assistance, like physical, personal assistance, go to that website, the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, and you will find a list of registered accessibility specialists that you can hire, and they will come and they will help you with it. I'm also a Texas registered specialist, but I represent the city. I cannot use that same qualification to be able to provide advice to the private sector. And then there's also websites like the easterseals.com where you can find more information. The good thing about ADA that there's just plenty and ample information out there on the internet. If you just Google, you'll find some assistance there.
Okay, well, thanks for that information. And on behalf of the Chamber, we want to thank you for joining us during this webinar. It was very informative, very insightful. And we also want to thank you for, your public service that you do for the city as an ADA coordinator. So
Well,
thank you very
thank
much.
you for all you do. Thank you for putting these webinars out there for distances. I think that they really need it, and hopefully more people will become interested in being proactive on ADA compliance. If there's anything else I can do for you, you let me know. I don't know that I ever provided my contact information here on our website, but let me just do it right now. Again, be aware that I may not be able to help you directly in terms of providing advice, but in general, for general information, I can be accessed at 212-3305, 915-212-3305.